HAPS broadcast and my, 2000th Periscope tutorial. My name is Dav. I broadcast in relation to American politics, the rise and fall of fascism in the United States, the role of deferment to evangelical Christianity, and the role of both sidesism in the media, the undue deference given to liars and grifters, and how to overcome that. And look, America already knows to a degree because Trump was voted out with 8 million votes in Joe Biden's favor in the popular vote, which doesn't count, but nevertheless a 302 electoral college votes to Joe Biden relative to Trump's 234 electoral college votes, meaning a definite triumph for Biden in the electoral college system, which is an archaic leftover from a time of slavery when the founding fathers endeavored to bring on board the racist slave owners to reassure them that they would not be compelled by the northern states to follow them in the trajectory of abolishing slavery. So it was a reassurance that there would be a thumb on the scales for voters in the relatively lower population southern states. And when I say lower population, I mean lower voting population, because enslaved people did not have the right to vote. There was a compromise of the 3/5 compromise, meaning that for every 3 out of every 5 slaves could be counted towards the population tallies for each state, further skewing the vote, the electoral power, the political power of voters in southern states. Now, how can I see comments? Because I'm missing my comments that I usually get when I broadcast to Periscope. So I'm wondering if there's something else I have to press. But at the same time, I'm really glad to be here broadcasting for the first time on HAPS, because apparently this is the platform to use to encourage your Periscope followers to also follow you on this channel, and thus have a mechanism to still watch your broadcasts when Periscope closes down at some point in March. I've heard rumors the 31st of March or the middle of March, but in any case, here I am on HAPS. I have migrated whilst also still simultaneously broadcasting to Periscope. So maybe if I want to see comments, I need to log in myself to Periscope on another device so that I can see what's happening. Okay, Periscope's discontinuing on the 1st of April. All right. So there's 12 people with me on Periscope. Hello. If I've missed your comments before, feel free to repeat them if you're not too disconcerted to do that. So the title for today was Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and the clown show that will hopefully be over sooner rather than later, because Biden's due to be inaugurated on the 20th of January, and we're all pretty excited about that. And we're also extremely nervous about what Donald Trump, a conscienceless, exploitative criminal, will do with his last 18 days in office. And what will his collaborators and co-conspirators in the White House and in the Republican Party do to further their undermining of American democracy, as well as American institutions and American well-being and prosperity and public health, etc., etc. What else will they mess up? Well, to start with, it looks like they're messing up the vaccination rollout. So millions of doses, but a relatively small proportion of people actually vaccinated, in no small part because of the Republican tendency, strengthened by Republican President Donald Trump, to not give people the funds needed to adequately affect public services. So as much as Republicans like to cry out that the nation will fall to socialism, I'm going to abandon the term socialism and embrace the term stronger social services. That's what Democrats specialize in. delivering social services to the public. If I want to see comments, I'm going to have to actually log in. There we go. All right. I can see that Alan's here, Molly's here. Nice. I can't recognize all those graphs, but still. So you might be missing an actual green screen house behind me. Instead, today you just have the green screen. I'll have to experiment more with HAPS. I don't know if it has the same ability to change my background for me, but maybe it does. If any of you have been messing around with HAPS and have tips for me on how to best use this platform, I'm open to tips. It's holiday time for me, so I'm busy with children on school holidays and how to best entertain them, but I'm still keeping my ear to the ground to follow what's happening in the United States. And it looks as if, yes, in LA, there is still a critical situation in many hospitals, and that other states are also continuing on this path of too many cases leading to not just too many deaths, but too many instances of chronic disease. Heart damage is being exhibited by people who've even had only a mild case of COVID, so they don't necessarily even know unless they're in the study to have a CT scan, a computerized topography scan of their body, and then they find out that there is a reduction to their heart capacity. There's some level of myocarditis or heart damage. So Molly says that she's red and green colorblind, so you see a brown screen. Bob was at the supermarket and there was a vaccine area, but no one was in line. And do you live in a bluish or a reddish or a purplish area, Bob? Alan points out that very good news, which is that US warship, the Nimitz, was recalled, which lowers the likelihood that Trump will be able to instigate war with Iran, although there are also a lot of stationed US troops in the Middle East still. So even with the Nimitz being recalled, there's still the possibility that Trump could use his final days in office to start a war. He's certainly having one woman executed on the 12th of January. She committed a very serious, terrible crime, but there are mitigating circumstances to argue against being killed by her country. Namely, she was very abused by her parents and sold into sexual servitude, essentially pimped out by her own parents, causing massive trauma to her in her earlier years. And then, yes, later on she became a murderer, but many people don't support the death penalty, so this appears to be yet another thing that William Barr and Donald Trump are doing to bully the rest of America who don't agree with state-sanctioned murder. And that's one way to stir the pot, one way to try and effect a five-pronged strategy as a fascist to deflect, dismay, deceive, distort, and dismay. So it's the dismay part where you have people going, no, please don't kill people. You're a lame duck president. You shouldn't really be rushing through executions in the few days before you have to vacate the Oval Office. But they dislike to display power. Dan the Man says this lady is still talking nonsense about the best president this country has ever seen, because Dan the Man is really excited about the over 300,000 deaths experienced by Americans, the devastating levels of economic, financial hardship experienced by millions of Americans, the chronic disease incurred by millions of Americans as a direct consequence of Trump's sadistic negligence and malevolent incompetence in relation to COVID-19, as well as his economic mismanagement even prior to the pandemic, whereby he orchestrated a trade war that badly hurt the financial prospects of American farmers and was papered over by the disbursement of $28 billion worth of taxpayer money to farmers to help make up to them temporarily the massive hit to their finances that they took as a consequence of the trade war launched by Trump in order to play up to his narrative as a fascist strongman, restoring order and balance to the world, which is what fascists play into when there's a catalyst, such as community concern that parents aren't being parenty enough anymore, that obedience is no longer a prized social virtue. And some people become so alarmed by that, so alarmed by social progress in relation to civil rights and social progress in relation to women's rights and social progress in relation to acceptance of intersex and transgender people. Now, I'll give a tiny little science lesson to say that some extreme trans-exclusionary feminists argue that biological sex is so rigid and just has two categories, and they pretend that they are backed by science in that assertion, whereas real biological science notes that there's various chromosomal conditions. You can be XXY or XYY. You can have Klinefelter syndrome. You can have androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is a syndrome in which you might present on your bodily surface as a woman, but find out at some point that the reason why you haven't had a period is because you don't have ovaries or a uterus. In fact, you have undescended testes, but there's something different about your bodily cells that they don't respond to testosterone. So there's been nothing to impel your testes to leave your body when you were being gestated in the womb. So they've stayed up there in your abdominal cavity, and some medical researchers and scientists used to recommend surgically removing the undescended testes in order to prevent potential cancerous mutations within the testes, because testes are supposed to be external. They're not supposed to be exposed to the higher temperature conditions of the internal bodily cavities. But more recent medical research into that has suggested, no, it's perfectly okay to leave the undescended testes internally placed and just not mess with people's bodies in that way, and that there's no significant increased risk of testicular cancer developing. And those people are real, and they don't have to fit into a neat binary division of gender or sex, because biology is actually a spectrum, and that's backed by science, and that's backed by scientific discoveries in the realm of genetics and chromosomal research. So when we attend public toilets right now, there's nobody standing guard outside trying to check our birth certificate, and that's because you can go to any toilet you want. There's just some people who want to make life more uncomfortable for intersex people or transgender identifying people. And there are certain situations where it's fair to have concerns. I would imagine prison situations, if you have men declaring that they identify as a woman in order to gain access to a woman's prison, particularly if they have a background of convictions of sexual assault, there's room for concern there, and needing perhaps more than just one single declaration that you're a woman. It's okay to have concerns. It's not okay to promote persecution of people who belong to those categories of gender diversity. And look, I've learned about this over the course of my life. I wasn't born knowing any of this stuff. I'm fortunate enough to have studied a little biology, enough to acquaint myself with some of these topics. I feel sad for Joanna Rowling because she's in a position to do a lot of harm, and I would imagine her Christian background has helped her decide for herself that she unbent enough to nod to the existence of homosexual people, to claim outside of her books that Gandalf is gay, but to not have actually very much detail or evidence within the books that having a homosexual relationship is okay. We've detected that your browser's CPU usage is very high at the moment. Close other open windows, tabs, and apps. Okay. Well, I will close some other things to reduce my CPU usage. All right. Thank you for the tip. All right, I hope that fixed it. How's everybody going with the HAPS experience here? Yes, Dan the man, if you don't have anything to contribute, you would be muted. And it's not a lie that Biden won. It's 60 court cases have been fought on the topic of trying to overturn the election results, and even Trump-appointed judges have smacked down all of the Trump-affiliated lawyers. Redemption's joined, and she's not even a citizen of the United States, yet she knows it all. Lol. Well, some people come to the conclusion that it's good to study American political history. Some people never have the occasion to do it, but I have, because I've been concerned for a few years now about the devolution of American politics into fascism. I mean, the fascists are in charge, and I shouldn't bandy that word around too readily, because I want it to be meaningful when I use it. And I know once you start putting that accusation out there, then other people will just pick it up and run with it and apply it to whatever they like as part of an emotional balancing project of their own. So when you tell fascist supporters that Trump is a fascist, and this is a time-tested technique of telling the public that the press, Lügenpresse or lying press, are not to be trusted whenever they report on corruption, whenever you pick on a stigmatized minority group and further persecute them and get your supporters to feel empowered and to celebrate that cruelty and that transgressive element, to say, I put America first so much that I'm prepared to rip babies away from their parents, all to the cause of keeping America number one, top dog, white majority dominant country. All of those promises, none of them are particularly sincere, but as far as appearances go, fascists will always continue to cater to that type of longing for cruelty, longing for power, longing for a restoration or an adherence to a status quo that I don't want to call them white supremacists, that white nationalists like. That's better. White nationalists is a better term, because they would prefer a nation that is white dominant. I don't want to put the word supreme in association with them and feed their personal delusions that they're in any way, shape, or form supreme, because they're not. I'm not arguing that there's anything inherently terrible about being white. There's an associated history of colonialism, but other people of other skin colors other than white have also been colonialists. It's not exclusive to white colored skin. How is the internet going? What will that do? Pip. Grid. All right. Is the mic okay? Sorry. I wonder how the sound is. 8 new messages. Please read your messages on Patreon. Thank you. I hadn't done that actually. Craig is saying Happy New Year. We had somebody from Saudi Arabia. Oh, and the Tea Party chap again. Thank you. You managed to mute them before I even had to see any Boston Tea Party comments. of course, I've seen that person before. They're gross and full of disinformation and poor quality assertions, and we don't platform those, and we're not obliged to either. The Second Amendment gives companies and people who use those companies' services the right to exclude troublemakers and trolls and agitators and bullies from a broadcast. So the First Amendment right gives you the right to not be oppressed by your government for your political opinions and political expressions. But I'm not your government, and my band of moderators are very capable of muting the voices of the people who come here to spread lies, whether they're aware or not of how steeped they are in a deceitful mentality, a mentality that is spreading resistance to vaccination, resistance to the rule of law, love for authoritarian rule, and cruelty to undocumented migrants and migrants alike. All right, check comments again, and maybe make a note to myself to check Patreon comments. Okay. It's been a busy couple of days. I'll give myself that. I've been trying to eat less sugar at nighttime because now that Trump's out, it's a great time to resume or replenish an exercise routine if you hadn't been doing that, because, wow, it's really blurry. Can you see me okay? What I'm looking at is very pixelated, but all right. There's a beauty filter. Video effects disabled. Oh, I can put them on, but they might have high CPU requirements. All right. Brightness, contrast. All right, I'll close that. Okay. Scroll for old comments. No, don't need to see anything new. Picture quality is poor. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing something very blurry as well. I can close one more thing. Still poor. All right, what if I do turn on beauty effects? Not beauty effects. Does that change anything? Now I look a little less blurred? Okay. Oh, and Phil's joined us. Hey, Phil. Oh, Elizabeth's got a resolution. Eat an apple every day or eat a piece of any fruit every day. That's great. I would join you in that resolution. I'm very conscientious about getting my children to eat a bunch of fruit, which they do, but I should set an example for them so that they see adults being committed to pursuing health as an important part of life. Health is important. It's important to getting things done. And gosh knows, we've really been alerted to how much work there is to do in order to preserve democracy. And democracy not just as an abstract comment, an abstract construct that we're attached to because we've heard positive things about democracy, but democracy as a true representation of people. Not to say that everybody has to get their own way, which is not possible. And I know the 74 million people who voted for Trump are feeling quite aggrieved and are being encouraged to feel quite aggrieved by various Republicans who right now are putting out little misinformation videos. Madison Hawthorne, he put out quite a nicely produced video in which he rolls up in his wheelchair, which probably implies to many of his Republican voters that he's a veteran, and he's not. He's somebody who didn't wear his seatbelt in a car accident and has been outed as a serial sexual harasser of women when he was at college before he dropped out. And but his video says that, yes, he's going to vote against certification of Joe Biden's victory because every American deserves to have a vote in a free, fair, and legal election. And what other brainwashing language does he use? He pretends that voter fraud is rampant when voter fraud is so rare. I think there's only 3 cases associated with this current election, and those have all been votes for Trump. People illegally registering a dead parent in order to pose as their dead parent and vote a second time for Donald Trump. That was one guy in Pennsylvania. I think there have been a couple more cases of election fraud, but again, all votes for Trump. And of course, those Republicans are 3 times more likely than their Democratic counterparts to contract COVID, because Democrats can still contract COVID. It's very prevalent in many communities and in many counties across the United States. But of course, Republican politicians have felt very compelled to toe the line of Trump's COVID denialism, which is part of his contrarian posturing. Mark Meadows apparently discouraged Trump from running with a mask mandate at an earlier point. Masks are a powerful signifier that something is wrong, that there's a pandemic and people need to watch out. But if you're pursuing a campaign line of nothing's wrong here, I haven't in any way been negligent, there's no federal crisis to speak of, so we don't need action at the federal level, just go about your daily business. What you really need, America, is an advocate for normalcy in order to return to normal. But during a pandemic, wishing it away and pretending it doesn't exist are actually not helpful steps to return to normalcy. If there had been a mask mandate, businesses would have been allowed to stay open, hospitals would not be overcrowded, and many more Americans would still be alive. Many empty chairs at tables would be filled, and many Americans would not be now suffering from chronic disease, kidney dysfunction, heart inflammation, reduced heart functioning, reduced lung capacity, et cetera, and an increased likelihood of developing Parkinson's disease or succumbing to a stroke or a heart attack. Mr. Ed joined. Yes, wearing a mask lets other people know you care, but is also just a potent visual cue to say, oh yes, there's a pandemic on. I should stand further back from other people if possible. I should potentially reconsider going to that party or attending that church service. Now, Robert Jones is I've got a fruit fly in here. Somebody's probably put mandarin peel in the bin. Do Americans call them mandarins, or do you call them clementines? I'm not entirely sure. Oh, Mr. Ed likes the shirt. Is it the shirt? Or the hairstyle? Something. What was I saying before I noticed a fruit fly? I was saying masks are a potent visual reminder that there's something wrong, and they help dissuade people from doing risky things. They help people be more conservative with their own personal risk budget, because nobody's perfect. We make certain gambles and certain decisions that will expose us to some risk, but we take more risks when we can forget that there's a pandemic, when people around us are not wearing masks, when the president is telling lots of people not to wear masks. That makes it even harder for people who aren't supporters of the president. But if we are exposed to a lot of videos of people doing the wrong thing, it can either propel us to be increasingly vigilant, or it can just wear us down as well. It's harder perhaps to keep wearing masks and doing the right thing if you're a young person and it doesn't feel personally convenient to refrain from parties and social interactions. If you can see that lots of people aren't anyway, lots of Republicans aren't refraining from social contact, lots of Republicans are still having parties and social gatherings. And young people are very powerfully biologically compelled to go out and meet each other. Their hormones are driving them towards mating activity. All right, fine. Closing. There we go. I closed some more. Now I've only got one more open tab, and that was hard for me. The only open tab I have remaining now, other than HAPS, is something that says, authoritarianism is not a momentary madness, but an eternal dynamic within liberal democracies. It's a chapter in a book. This chapter is by Karen Stenner and Jonathan Haidt. And it's from a book called Authoritarianism in America. Can it happen here? And I am Twitter friends with the author of that chapter, and she's agreed to be interviewed in February because she's busy at the moment running an experiment in Georgia. She's a social psychologist, and she's running an experiment that she has to conduct and then write up about use of messaging systems. So I'm excited to read her research when it's finished, and excited to interview her in February. So that's Karen Stenner, and you can follow her on Twitter. Oh, Phil's here, Paul's here, Jeff's here. Nice. What else is Judy and Jenna Ellis up to today? It's been a bit of a low light, hasn't it? Mix it up and sit where the fruit flies are. Well, I just had one. I didn't feel happy about being disturbed by a fruit fly in the middle of a broadcast. But yes, I took a screenshot from an article which described a book by Robert Jones, who's a Christian researcher I mentioned before. His book is called White Too Long: The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. And Robert P. Jones shows that all white Christian American groups, evangelicals, Catholics, mainline Protestants, exhibit more racist attitudes than non-religious white Americans, and more importantly, demonstrates a potential causal connection between their racism and their Christianity. So just a day before the book's release, in July 28th of 2020, last year, doesn't it feel good to say that, but at the same time, it doesn't properly feel like 2021 until Biden's inauguration in January. So Jones wrote, "This disparity in attitudes about systemic racism between white Christians and whites who claim no religious affiliation is important evidence that the common and catalyzing denominator is religious identity." So that's really important to keep in mind, that there seems to be something about worshipping white Jesus that convinces people that whiteness is inherently good and that people of other skin colors should be viewed with suspicion, that their claims of being oppressed should be viewed skeptically, and that evidence that there is ongoing racism at an individual and systemic level is something to be challenged and opposed. And that perhaps there's something synonymous between Christianity and goodness. Now, I think Donald Trump has helped promote secularism in the United States. I don't think there's any conclusive data yet to support that hypothesis, but I'm imagining that some young people will have been put off Christianity because it's harder to persuade young people when they're probably less likely to watch Fox than their parents. And I think watching Fox has caused a lost generation to occur. Many people have effectively lost relationships with their parents because of attitudes and opinions adopted by their parents as a direct result of being exposed to massive amounts of disinformation on Fox News. Disinformation about the pandemic, about the value of hydroxychloroquine, about the threat posed by Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement. All of these things have been presented in ways that Rupert Murdoch is very adept at using as powerful mind manipulative tools. And when employed in conjunction with efforts by another American billionaire, Robert Mercer, who supported and funded Cambridge Analytica, which stole data from people's Facebook accounts and used it to individually target people according to their own personal fears and concerns in order to hype up support for Donald Trump when he was more of a politically unknown quantity in 2016. And then after 2016, to try and reinforce this presentation of Trump as a fighter for the common people, as someone who would flip all of the concerns about dwindling power and influence, who would help Christian evangelicals and Christian dominionists from any denomination live their dream of restoring Christian virtues to America. And when I say Christian virtues, I'm talking of white nationalist virtues that foreground and center the rights of white Christian people to be skeptical of the claims of Black Americans and to be skeptical of the claims of refugees and asylum seekers, all of which sounds very profoundly anti-Christian as Christianity is understood by outsiders. But there's a whole movement called ex-evangelicals of people who assure us that within Christianity, hypocrisy and surface allegiance to values is common as a cover for selfishness and in-group preferential dealing and aspirational dominionism, wanting to impose their values on the rest of America, even as more and more people become socially liberal, become more accepting of gay marriage, become more accepting of gender diversity, etc. Christians hope to claw back some of those social values, or at least claw enough political power that they can impose their sentiments on the rest of the United States. And the more power they get and the more platforms they get, the more opportunity they have to try and brainwash people into opposing religion as some kind of massive Holocaust. And you'll see that regardless of how high the death toll has gotten from COVID, there are still conservative people on social media claiming, well, 4.2 million American babies have been murdered this year by abortion, because any abortion counts in those statistics. And even a later abortion, which is typically a deeply personal, deeply distressing choice made by a woman who has carried a baby close to term, an unborn child, in the hope of having a living, breathing baby at the end of it, but is pushed into a position of distressing medical news where they have to consider a third trimester abortion. And the rise of conservatives is almost the rise of people who want to say that you never have any excuse as a woman for making medical decisions about what's happening in your body in relation to your pregnancy, that your excuses are never any good. And abortion providers have said that they often have conservative Christian clients, but they'll always relate that their causes are obviously exceptional, that they have a good reason to get an abortion, but nobody else does. Other women get abortions because of moral decrepitude and moral weakness, and they happen to have a really good reason. So the rise of people like that who have compartmentalized their lives so successfully that they don't recognize their own imperfections, or they don't recognize their own vulnerabilities, and all of their intellectual engagement with the world is geared towards deriving satisfaction from harshly judging other people, and therefore propping up their own self-esteem on a hierarchical ordering of merit. Everybody else below me, me superior to everybody else because of the rightness of my religious beliefs. And yeah, that's a problem. It's a problem if your definition of a good person becomes someone who professes a Christian belief, someone who believes in Jesus. That is your guarantee of goodness. That breeds, I guess, moral complacency, and we're dealing with some of the negative outcomes associated with that. Moral complacency on the part of white Christians, or not all white Christians, many white Christians, and prior to 2016, there was a lot of complacency on the left in general, meaning that Hillary Clinton didn't quite get the turnout she needed spread out around enough swing states in the 2016 election. There were too many people on the left who were convinced she would win anyway, and they didn't need to personally lower themselves to vote for a woman who they felt did not adequately push the envelope as a progressive politician. And then after the election, have just intensified their denialism about the need to have voted for Hillary Clinton to safeguard the nation and the people of America against Donald Trump, to safeguard the people of the world and the climate and animals from the depredations of Donald Trump and his corrupt cronies in the Environmental Protection Authority and everywhere else that has promoted coal interests and oil interests and the interests of Vladimir Putin and the fossil fuel dependent Russian economy against the interests of American geopolitical stability. A lot of elements of stability are threatened by the ascendancy of Russian interests and the ascendancy of fossil fuel interests compared to what should be a more generally spread descendancy of fossil fuel interests, because the military is destabilized by climate change. American farmers and agricultural life is destabilized by climate change. People living in their homes, personal safety and security of people is destabilized by under-addressed climate change. And yet Vladimir Putin has managed to help install conservative politicians all around the world, particularly in the West, who engage in massive science denialism. So Biden's in office. He gives many of us hope that he will be proactive and determined in using the power of government for the benefit of the people, in promoting renewable energies and supporting renewable energies, reducing public taxpayer subsidies of fossil fuel industries, and redirecting some of those subsidies towards renewable energy industries so that they can continue to accelerate their advance and their ability to provide energy in a reliable way to more and more Americans. And a lot of those advances are already happening, but Trump removed some government assistance from the solar energy industry, and that has been a drag on the growth of that industry and the ability of that industry to employ Americans with good, well-paying jobs. I should talk about that every day. That should be some of my opening material, is jobs, 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 jobs for renewable energy industries that will be available to Americans if we stop passively allowing right-wing ascendancy. When they game the electoral college system, they have so much voter suppression that people who are on top of the issues in relation to science, disease, energy, etc., are sidelined because of some disproportionate power of white working class voters in swing states awarded to them in the affirmative action program of the Electoral College system. That's what the Electoral College system does. It's an affirmative action program for white people. And that's its legacy from the days of the founding of America as an independent nation, to reassure white people who believed fervently in the superiority of white people as a justification for deriving huge profits from the exploitation of Black enslaved people. And the legacy of those opinions and those rationalizations and that yearning and nostalgia has helped form a new Confederacy movement under Trump. People determined to keep out the Democrats at any cost. People determined to oppose access to voting. People determined to oppose mail-in votes because it lets more people vote more easily. Whether they'll admit it or not, many in the Republican Party have their energies and their efforts geared to reducing the ability of Black Americans to cast a vote, because they know that the party they vote for is not behind white nationalism in the same way that the Republican Party is. So that's been quite a bit of a long chat from me today, because I don't have my screen sharing facility set up yet on HAPS. So you've had more of a rant than usual. I hope it hasn't been too overwhelming and that there's been some useful information in it. We haven't had very many comments. I guess I have not been engaging with information that's that up to date. Well, before I leave, let me see if there's any breaking news on Twitter that we could talk about before I go. My husband is exercising right now, and I made him turn the music down, and he asked me to tell people that I was preventing Mr. Davkat from exercise. Well, not from exercising, but from playing music as loudly as he needed to. Jenna Ellis is getting destroyed on Twitter. Yes, people are pointing out that she was a traffic lawyer who was fired for incompetence after 6 months, and that her career progression has been to get COVID from Rudy Giuliani sitting next to her and farting a lot. I should say passing wind. What's a fancy way to say farting? Gaseous emissions. What's the good news from Alan that Bob is referring to? Are we talking about the US Nimitz still? Paul loves my informative chats. I'm so glad. Oh, I just saw an update from Manu Raju that Mitch McConnell's Louisville home and Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco home were both vandalized in the last 2 days. Lordy. Make America Great is trending again, and so is Cruz. I wonder what Ted has done. We already know Ted's full on board with the sedition, because he already offered to defend that very seditious case that was to go before the Supreme Court, but they rejected it for not even having the standing, whereby the Texan Attorney General, what's his name? The Texan Attorney General, Ken Paxton, indicted for fraud, but not charged yet, was suing various states in which Joe Biden won a critical swing state that helped give him the Electoral College victory and consequently the election victory. Poor old Britain is suffering through through Brexit, which is a very MAGA concept and difficult to undo, but was also promoted by Russian influence. And now their trade is also going to be stuffed. There's a lot more bureaucratic hurdles for people who are exporting things or importing things, and just a lot more difficulties in relation to cooperating. So Ted Cruz has said we need a commission to study unprecedented voter fraud, and he's being mocked. People are saying, provide an example. There's a Simpsons gif where Homer Simpson's opening a book that says nothing and more nothing. All right, shall we have a look at the actual statement from Ted Cruz? Oh, wow. So the plan of Trump's Trust the Plan is apparently called a contingent election. And people are saying elements have not been met for a contingent election of the president and vice president by Congress. It has only happened twice in America's history. So there's a summary here I'm reading from the internet. Summary: the 12th Amendment to the Constitution requires that presidential and vice presidential candidates gain a majority of the whole number of electors appointed in order to win election. With a total of 538 electors representing the 50 states and the District of Columbia, 270 electoral votes is the magic number, the arithmetic majority necessary to win the presidency. What would happen if no candidate won a majority of electoral votes? In those circumstances, the 12th Amendment also provides that the House of Representatives would elect the president and the Senate would elect the vice president in a procedure known as a contingent election. Well, doesn't apply because one candidate did win a majority of electoral votes, and all of Trump's court cases have not succeeded in any state to overturn the actual results of the election, to produce evidence, failed to produce evidence of fraud, failed to persuade any judge to formally revise the election results. So a contingent election has been implemented twice in the nation's history under the 12th Amendment, first to elect the president in 1825, and second, the vice president in 1837. So yes, in a contingent election, the House would choose amongst three candidates who received the most electoral votes. Each state, regardless of population, casts one single vote for president in a contingent election, but again, not relevant. Yeah, so, Americans turned out. Americans voted decisively for Joe Biden, which is how elections in America work. Ideally, the popular vote would help, but Joe Biden's victory, very decisive in the popular vote system, but also decisive in the electoral college system. 302 trumps 234 in a good way. We could say 302 Biden's 234. All right, folks, I think I should go to sleep. It's quite late for me. Oh, wow, we had some comments from Molly and Alan. I will review them. Molly asked, did you know you can support Dav's awesome work by becoming a Patreon member? That's right. So cool, Molly. That's right. For just $2 a month, you could be a cool cat for Dav Chat. Love it, Molly. Are you a jingle writer in your free time? And she's listed the address of the Patreon Dav Chat. So obviously, finances are difficult and precarious for many Americans as the federal government continues to fail to provide a mask mandate, which makes the spread so high that many people are still left with a reluctance to leave their homes and participate in economic transactions outside of their home. So Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, will keep getting richer as people continue to get deliveries to their home. not everybody is afraid, but a substantial number of Americans have very valid, very legitimate concerns about going outside and mingling with people when this virus is transmitted by airborne mechanisms. And you can get it just from being near other people's expelled air, from droplets contained in their nasal or oral emittances. And the science of masks are real, that not only the mask doesn't just prevent you from transmitting COVID, but it can prevent the wearer from contracting COVID. It's a barrier to expulsion of droplets containing viral particles. If it's got multiple layers, that's apparently better. If it's got more space in front of your mouth, that slows the air and there's more time for the particles to bounce around and get trapped in the fibers, the woven or non-woven fibers of the mask. And it's been demonstrated by various research studies that in counties where mask mandates were instituted, their incidence fell or stayed steady, whereas in counties without mask mandates, instances of COVID rose. And so it's good to talk about it because it can feel crazy making when you still see a president and you still see prominent Republicans ignore the reality of the virus, continue to expose their fellow Americans to harm, to approach the whole situation with an arrogance that says, well, won't happen to us. We are convinced that risk will be concentrated in Black American populations and Hispanic American populations, and we're not concerning ourselves with inconveniencing ourselves in order to save the lives or prevent serious illness occurring to people within those populations, Native American, Hispanic American, or Black American. You see too many wealthy white people dancing in a conga line at Republican parties at Mar-a-Lago, parties within other Republican celebrations, and even wealthy people on the left as well, acting as if they've been exposed to too much virus, the contagion of bad ideas. And it's hard to sacrifice for others. It's hard to remember the risks. But if you have empathy and you remind yourselves about the suffering of healthcare workers and you allow yourself to be exposed to the messaging from doctors and nurses in hospitals who are telling us that they are burnt out, frustrated, angry, disappointed, and that their problems are escalating because of the increasing need to ration care or to abide by new policies to determine to not treat some people. That paramedics, if they can't resuscitate somebody on the scene, they're not to transport people to certain hospitals in Los Angeles because there are no beds for them. These are all critical things to note that would help us. So I was right, Molly. You took a lot of advertisement courses in college. This is why your expertise, your speciality is showing. Alan says, why not join Dav's elite group of intellectual supporters at patreon.com/DavChat. Love it. Thank you so much, Molly and Alan. And everybody else, all my moderators, Paul and Jeff. And who else do we have? Bernadette, Kevin. Thank you so much, everybody. Oh, Bob's brother is still on a ventilator and was in an induced coma. Is he still in an induced coma? No, but he was. But he's still on a ventilator. Well, that sounds as if it's been a while. So even if he recovers, it's hard because, you know, his prognosis is not the best, and his body and his organs are likely to sustain significant damage. And that's hard. That's hard to deal with that, I would imagine, as a caring brother. And I know Bob is a very caring person and a good musician. So my commiserations to your brother and to you, Bob, and of course my best wishes for his recovery. Americans are suffering while most do nothing. It's probably not most, it's probably just a very visible minority of people. I would imagine mask usage is high in certain areas and not high in other areas. Oh, so have people actually got the $600 stimulus payments? You're welcome, Bob. Yes, $600 is shamefully inadequate, but we can just hope that if the Georgian runoff elections go well and the two Democratic candidates make it and succeed, then Biden will have a cooperative Congress to work with. Congress has the power of the purse. We have to keep telling people that. We have to keep asking journalists to remind people as well, or to educate people about that for the first time. Congress holds the power of the purse, and Republicans don't like to give people stimulus packages. It's America's only hope, because otherwise Mitch McConnell will try and run America into the ground in order to cause people to be in so much pain, and that potentially some of them might become irrational enough to vote for Republicans. That's governance by pseudo-populism, hurting people until they can't think straight and they vote for a party that continues to be against their best interests. Lady CPR knows of 4 people that have gotten their stimulus payments. Okay. So it's the Biden administration encourages people to think of it as down payments, because if Georgia goes well, there'll be more. There'll be potentially $2,000 checks passed by the Senate. They've already been passed by the House. The Senate gets to pass it as well. If Mitch McConnell's power is diminished, then good things can happen for the US. I've asked my husband to postpone our move to the US further now, away from April, because I'm concerned that the vaccination rollout is still being too much sabotaged by Trump and his cronies, and that it may be August. I'm not leaving a country where my children can attend school to move to America if it's still not safe to send your children to school. So might see you all in August, potentially, and fingers crossed that they step it up, or that Biden can soon take over and help states get the infrastructure support they need to roll out the vaccine, and that giving Biden the public profile of an actual president will, and all of his appointments of people skilled in science communication who will help undo some of the damage done. And I know it's very hard to roll that back, because first impressions are powerful, and a lot of people got their incorrect first impressions about the virus from Trump, who staked out his ground in saying that it wasn't real, that it was a Democratic hoax, and underplaying it at every turn, and underplaying the moral requirement for a president to help the citizens of the country he leads, to use the Defense Production Act to step up mask production and personal protective equipment production. Biden will do that, but in the meantime, too many Americans are running with implausible ideas about how the pandemic isn't real because it's got a 99% recovery rate. And their maths is so flawed that they don't understand that if many people are infected, that 99% rate isn't that great. To say, well, say 50% of Americans are infected and 1 in every 100 infected people will die, then 1 in every 200 people will die prematurely, losing decades of their life, not getting to celebrate wedding anniversaries or see grandchildren grow up or graduate or marry when they could have. I know my grandparents nearly got to see me get married. They were so close, and they lived to be quite old. So imagine all of the milestones that people are missing out of when 1 in every 200 Americans over the age of 65 has died. I'm not actually entirely sure that I'm remembering that statistic correctly, so don't quote me on it. But I think I read that today, and if I'm right. All right, so Bernadette, everybody, has received your stimulus $600 payments, $600 down payments. More to come if the Georgian Democratic Senate candidates succeed. So take care, everybody. My final thought is, it's a question, what do you think of trying to publish a coffee book that tries to help shame Republicans? Because a lot of their Twitter comments are transitory. People might pile on or say, damn you, Ted Cruz, for telling us to celebrate Thanksgiving by meeting each other. But what about something in printed permanent form that's not as ephemeral as an internet social media post, where you could buy this coffee book to shame all of the Republicans who have posted, I'm celebrating, I'm going to this restaurant, we shouldn't isolate, we shouldn't wear masks, we shouldn't take precautionary steps. Just to put them on glossy paper and have as a printed book that people could buy in an effort to say, we see you. We don't just see you now, we're getting a book so we can see you going forwards, and we will not forget what you did and what you said during this hour of need when there was a public health crisis, and instead of helping, you pushed the public health messaging down. You kicked public health messaging and tried to consign it to a corner. What do we think of that book idea? Bernadette didn't jump for joy about the $600 payments, was just sad at how low America has sunken. That's fair. All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to bed. Take care. See you all later. The picture is a bit pixelated, but I hope at least the sound quality was acceptable. And I'm going to go microphone shopping tomorrow, I think. So take care and talk to you soon. If you're a new listener on HAPS, I hope welcome to the show. And if you are listening on YouTube, hello as well. I couldn't see any comments on YouTube, but I have more to learn in using HAPS. Yes, hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Jeff. Good night. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Molly. Wow, Bob says, on New Year's Eve, hundreds stood in front of St. Peter's Hospital chanting, it's a hoax. Do you mean St. Peter's in where you live? Or do you mean St. Peter's in... Anyway, I better go. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye. He still exercised. He just turned the music down, but I will thank him for doing that. He deserves it. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care. Stay safe. Stay safe. Look after yourselves and each other.